This podcast is brought to you by Neuro Creative Studio, the #1 provider of one-to-one applied neuroscience coaching and development programs, designed to enhance your creativity and effectiveness. Find out more at neurocreative.studio.
You're listening to the Ambition Incubator podcast, and I'm your host, Deirdre Morrison. Creativity is something that we all need, use, and indeed have in spades, but we don't always appreciate it or know how to encourage it. In this occasional series of conversations, I'm talking to creative professionals, people who get paid to provide creativity on tap, and people who've been able to remain creatively successful over the course of their careers. We'll talk about the highs and lows of this kind of work, try to disentangle their secrets for success, and find out whether Steve Jobs was right when he said that real artists ship. Today, I'm speaking to someone who enables the work of other creative professionals. Rob King specialises in working with creative agencies, so he's seen a few in his time. We talk about the difference between good and great agencies, the generation gap that's opened up in certain creative sectors, and we talk about why a business might not be best placed to promote themselves because of what Rob refers to as a sort of proximity bias in which they fail to see their own selling points. If you're in the creative sector, then this will be right up your street. But if you're in any kind of business where you need to understand the power of selling your own strengths, then this episode is for you. Now, Rob, let's get into this whole idea of what it is that differentiates a good creative agency from an exceptional or a great one. What in your experience is the differentiator or differentiators?
Yes, well, thank you. It's a great question, first of all. I mean, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this in my career, and we go in and meet lots of different creative businesses in the work that we do, mostly creative agencies. And obviously, if you think about the creative agency, even within that, there's lots of definitions, production companies, studios, digital companies. But broadly, most of them fit into what I would call a creative agency of anywhere from 2, 3, 4 people, all the way up to sort of 70 plus, 100 plus type businesses. So if you think about, that question of, what separates a good versus a great agency, I guess there's sort of 3 or 4 different areas really. And broadly, I would summarize those as culture, the culture within the agency, creativity, think about the sort of the creative output that agency delivers, and then finally probably specialism, so that they have an ability to kind of really own a particular area and specialize on it. And within that, of course, there's also the commercial piece, which is kind of where we come in at the client key. So we are a growth engine for creative agencies, so we're always kind of focusing on how can a creative agency sell themselves more effectively, get out there and actually deliver more work. And fundamentally, I think that the really great agencies are able to embed that idea at the heart of the creative process.
Yeah, because it is an interesting conundrum, isn't it? When you've got a great culture, a lot of creativity, a specialism and so on, then that doesn't really go very far unless you are actually getting it out there, unless you are selling that product. And what is it that you think gets in the way for some agencies of doing that for themselves or finding their way to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's this idea that I often talk about this, and it's going to be in our book that I've just written. But this idea of sales being a bit of a dirty word in the creative industry. The idea, my view is that sales actually needs a rebrand. It needs reframing and rebranding within the creative industry, because a lot of people in our industry, rightly or wrongly, have this view that sales is a bit of a negative thing, which is a bit of a paradox, really, if you think about it, because it's actually the thing that really sets most businesses, agencies, creatives going. And without an effective sales or new business process in place, that agency is only ever going to get to a certain point relying on organic growth. So I think that's the first kind of big idea, is that, we need to kind of look at this word of sales and what it means to people in a slightly different way. And for kind of many, many years, we've had these negative connotations around the art of selling and sales, essentially. And I think what's happening is creative companies are coming around to this idea that actually they do need to be getting out there and selling their ideas. And as you said, all great creativity begins as an idea, a blank page. Nothing happens until you're able to get out there and ultimately, in the world we're talking about here, creative agencies commercialize that. You've got to be able to take those ideas out there and put them in front of somebody who's willing to pay for them.
Absolutely. I mean, you're right. There is this real, I guess, love-hate relationship with the idea, because if we want to continue to be and produce creative thinking, creative output, then we need some level of input. And that is, whether you think of it as commission, whether you think of it as, if you back in the day, Leonardo had his sponsors and his patrons and so on. That was sales. I mean, he had to pitch all of that. He had to bring in the clients effectively. Is it maybe something to do with the fact that, we give up, or we feel like we're giving up some level of control when we sell something to a client, that we're going to have to mold to what it is that they want from us?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question, and we do kind of see that, I suppose, with some of the people that we're working with. And I think what's really important here is to separate out that distinction between perhaps creativity for artistic purposes and, dare I say it, creativity for more commercial purposes. So if we think again about the agency sector, most of those companies are that. They're companies, they're businesses. They need to rely on commercial elements to actually stay in business. They are providing a creative service to their clients to help them usually communicate more effectively, better, solve problems, solve challenges, right? So fundamentally, there's this inherent commercial creative driver that sits alongside the creative driver. So what I think is really important is that recognition of that actually happening. And in terms of the control that you talked about, yes, I think there is perhaps a bit of reluctance to let go of some of that artistic process. But I suppose most of the people that we work with don't really I think they recognize that they're in business to kind of, serve the needs of their clients, work with people, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas perhaps if you're talking more on the kind of creativity for artistic purposes, there clearly would be, some reluctance, a lot of reluctance, I imagine. I mean, I know quite a few artists, and many of them have as you would expect them to, that very singular vision and focus of what it is they want their art to be, and no commercial element at all is prepared to disrupt that. And again, rightly so.
Mm. And so when you come in and you're working with an agency and you are effectively taking that if I'm understanding this right, you are taking the lead on that commercial aspect of it for them. You are helping them to generate the commercial input that they need in order to be the creatives that they are. How does that relationship then, does that free them up more? Does that give them more of an insight? Does it enable them to take it on in a different way themselves in their own minds? Or talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think, yes, it probably does in a way, because, it's back to this idea of, creativity, they're not necessarily best placed to run those kind of sales, commercial elements within their business. Some people are, and I think, it's back to this idea of, some of the great agencies are run by people that are kind of born salespeople. They know how to get out there and do, the kind of commercial bit as well as the creative parts of their business. But yeah, I think that is what we do. We do free people up to go and, ultimately deliver better creative work, to have more time to think about the problems they want to kind of tackle with their clients. And it's about taking away some of that kind of headache for them, really. We run new business campaigns, we run commercial campaigns for them. We're able to take quite a lot off their plate in terms of the overall kind of new business piece, but also strategically. I think we're quite good at looking at an agency, what they do, the clients they work with, the output the creative output they deliver, and kind of thinking, okay, where could we take that? Why is this agency successful here? And can we maybe take them to kind of new areas of the market over here? So yeah, we do take quite a lot off their plate.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, because we don't see ourselves the way others see us.
Yes,
and I think that outside view is very, very important.
Absolutely, yeah.
And actually, when you were talking about that as well, it reminded me of an interview I did a while back with someone I've known for a long, long time, actually, and she has worked in the arts sector for many, many years as a strategist, as a marketing person for them, but what she found when she started her own business was that she couldn't apply what she knew about marketing, about sales, about strategy to developing her own business. It was almost like, as she put it, the cobbler's children going barefoot. So I guess that is one of those things, isn't it? That we don't, we always put ourselves last in the line, and that can maybe affect how much priority we give to our own sales and our own marketing as well, especially if we're in that, doing it for other people.
Definitely. I mean, I've spent quite a lot of time recently speaking about proximity bias, and often, we can't see the things that are right in front of us because we're just too close to them. And where it's kind of, to get around that, you almost need somebody to come in and work with you to try and sort of unlock some of the value that you're kind of sitting on, really. And all creatives have that. Everybody's got, not just creatives, everyone's got kind of lots of value, their experiences to date, the things they've been through. But often, we're so close to things within businesses, within our sort of day-to-day, we can't actually see them. And I think part of the process of kind of growing a creative business is really sort of stepping away and saying, why are you successful here? And that's kind of where we come in and work with people to do that. But your friend is exactly, the kind of person that is going through that, really, with lots of proximity bias, and is not able to kind of implement things into her own business.
So just going back a little bit and looping back to, what makes the difference between good and great. And you've mentioned the culture, the creativity, and the specialism. Are there any, we'll just step away from the selling of the product for a minute, but in terms of those three, how do they gel together? Are there any strands that you see repeating again and again in the greats? And how would you maybe start advising people to aspire to those, to move towards those?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that we always kind of come across is it's quite a controversial idea, but the idea that creativity is not the most important thing in your agency.
I can see why that's controversial.
Yeah, exactly. And lots of people do have that reaction. But let me make the case. Here's the thing. All creative agencies, and there are lots of them, hundreds and thousands of them in this country alone, produce creative work. So, if you go on that sort of basic point, that alone is not going to get you where you need to be in terms of growing, thriving, succeeding. Yes, it's highly important, of course it is, but it is not the singular most important thing about any creative agency. Now, I would expect to be kind of shot down in flames by lots of people hearing this, but that is my view. As I say, in isolation, it's not enough. As part of the mix overall, it's clearly very, very important. But allied with that creativity is a need to be able to go out and take it and, get it in front of clients who are prepared to pay for it, as I said. So that's my first kind of big idea. Secondly, I think agency culture is something that we see time and time again, as you say. The really great agencies are able to create an internal agency culture where people love being a part of that team. And it might sound a slightly obvious point, but again, it's actually quite difficult to do for a variety of reasons. The personalities of people leading that business, the kind of business levels. But it's instantly noticeable, put it like that, when you go into a creative company or an agency and you can see those that have got a brilliant, almost family-like culture, where their team feel empowered, supported, it's fun, they're enjoying what they're doing, and everything's not an uphill struggle. I think those are the traits that we really see among great creatives and creative companies.
Yeah, there's something interesting actually that just came up there when you mentioned that, because this idea of family and this idea of this cohesive group, if you like, as the agency. And one of the things that I have been talking to people about over the last while is, since COVID, we appear to have had a big shift in what people are willing to do and accept in terms of where they work and how they work. Mm-hmm. And there also appears to be a generation gap emerging. And I don't know if you're seeing this, but we obviously have a lot of agency owners and founders who are a certain generation, and they have worked for a long time to get their agency to that stage and working in certain ways. And we now have newer generations of people who just don't work the same way. And this may be outside of what we're talking about a little bit here today, but I'm just wondering what you're seeing in that. I'm finding it fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. And, there's lots of different things that kind of spring to mind immediately. Obviously, as you say, since the pandemic, it's completely revolutionized the way that agencies work, the way that clients buy from agencies, the way that agencies get out there and do business with clients, the way that we access people, talk to people, engage with them, it's completely changed. And so everyone is kind of evolving still. We're still in that kind of evolving mechanic right now. We're doing sort of partly digital, partly in real life. It's changing. And that's kind of fascinating in itself. In terms of your point about kind of generational work, yes. I think back to the kind of family environment, it can go two ways, right? So whilst the kind of family environment and great kind of culture where you feel kind of nurtured and respected and empowered to do your work is brilliant and absolutely advocated. If you think about the idea of family, lots of families don't have great relationships and they are slightly challenging to deal with. I can think of several family dynamics that are like that. And so you have to be kind of very mindful that it doesn't go too far. That actually you don't have those family or familial elements that kind of creep into your business life and your agency life. So there's quite a fine line that I think people have to be mindful of. Mm-hmm. And again, yes, that is, of course, back to this notion of generational integration. Normally people running agencies are, perhaps slightly older, or these days not that much older than some of the sort of other people within the agency. And I think, again, back to this idea of good versus great, the better agencies I find have flatter hierarchical structures. They're less kind of top down and, not afraid to put someone who's 22 in a senior client facing role, for example,
Yeah.
So, lots of different things going on at the moment in terms of how we're working and, engaging with internal teams and culture.
Just before we started, I did tip you off to the one question that I always ask creative pros in this series, and it does seem that this one is actually written for you, but I always ask people what they make of the Steve Jobs quote, real artistship.
Yeah, you're right. It's kind of the dream quote for us, really, real artistship. There's another quote, if I can answer a quote with a quote by Samuel Butler, and an author, and I think the quote is, any fool can paint a picture, but it takes a wise man to be able to sell it.
Yeah.
And I love that quote. And again, it's a sort of paraphrase of Steve Jobs, really, as we've said several times throughout our conversation. nothing happens with any great creative idea if we're talking about commercial creativity here for a moment, nothing happens without a creative idea unless you get out there and get someone to pay for it fundamentally, which is really what I think, Steve Jobs is saying. And so that's really our view. And once we start to kind of reframe that view of that whole process as inherently positive rather than negative, then it starts to become quite transformational, I think, for people, because they are kind of empowered then to get out there and start having more of those conversations to sell their creativity.
Yeah. I guess because if they can't do their work for somebody else because they're not letting them see it, making it known to them, then it's a trickle-down effect, isn't it? The person who then needs their services, their creative services, can't do the thing that they do. And it's a real block in the system. Completely.
And again, we've got a kind of almost saturation point now of creative companies. There are so many, which is a great thing, by the way. There are so many creative companies, agencies, production companies, studios out there that if you're not talking to your clients on a regular basis and having these conversations, somebody else will be. And that's the kind of the thing to be aware of, is if you don't get out there and kind of do what you need to do to grow your business and sell, then someone else will. And I think people really need to be aware of that, really.
I noticed, Rob, that you had some hints and tips that were available to people through your website and so on. Do you want to just give us a little shout out for where it is that people can best go to find out more about what you do? And also, guys, what I would say is that even if you're not a creative agency, having read through the list, there are some things there that you should take note of. But have you got a website address or a link that we can include for that, please?
Yeah, our website is theclientkey.com. And there's lots of articles and blog posts on there under the articles section. A whole bunch of stuff specifically for agencies and agency owners. There's also some handy guides and some downloads that you can just use and pop your email address in, and that'll come through to you. And then the other area where we put a lot of content is our LinkedIn profiles. If you go onto my Rob King, the Client Key LinkedIn profile, we put a lot of content out there on growing creative companies, the creative sector more broadly. And agencies. And as you say, I mean, all of the things that we've talked about can be applied to other business areas. I mean, we work exclusively with the creative sector, but these are kind of rules and themes and lessons and methods that can apply really to any business.
And there's a book coming out. What's the book called?
There is a book coming out, yes. I've been working on the final draft again this morning. The book is called Selling Creativity. It's a how-to guide for agency owners and creatives to learn and master the art of sales.
Fantastic. Well, we will keep an eye out for that. And if you've got a link to where we'll be able to get it when it's ready, then we'll drop that in the show notes as well. Rob, thank you so much. It has been a really interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. So I'm grateful for your time.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And look forward to chatting soon.
You're still here? Great. Look, I know there's a lot to choose from out there, so thanks for flying with Ambition Incubator Airlines, and I look forward to seeing you on board again soon. Seriously though, thank you for tuning in. My guests and I love hearing about what inspires you on the show and what advice has made a difference in your life or work, and what you'd like more of. So get in touch. If you want to know about my other work, head over to ambitionincubator.com for details. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more great interviews, advice, and bite-sized brain science every week.